Hello and welcome to Staking Mondays. We are live. My name is Ken. I'm here with the co-founder of Staking Rewards, Marco Schmiedel. And today we have with us a true Cosmos OG, Jack Zampolin of Sommelier Finance, Core One, and Cosmos. All right, Jack, let's jump right into some lightning round questions here. What was your first investment?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for having me. Really appreciate it. I've been working with you guys as validators since the Cosmos Hub launch. So really appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah.
And lightning round questions. What was my first non-Bitcoin or Ethereum investment? I think it was actually, Cosmos, Atoms. But then right after that, it was Akash Network.
That's awesome. And what are you saying is currently the most underrated project in crypto?
I mean, I would say Cosmos in general, and I think we'll dig into that in a lot more detail here. But especially with a lot of the talk around interoperability and bridging, especially with the recent hacks, I think that the work that we've done is widely underrated and really starting to gain some traction.
And which alternative cryptocurrency inspired your work currently?
I would say that Bitcoin has kind of inspired all of the work that I've done in crypto. It is the OG of cryptocurrencies. And there's this, the first project that I worked at that was in crypto was a project called Blockstack. It's called Stacks now. And, that's kind of a Bitcoin maxi shop. And I moved from there into Cosmos. And Cosmos is basically like a bunch of Bitcoin maxis that think proof of stake might actually work. So it's I would definitely say Bitcoin on that one.
Cool. And on the other side, which person do you think influenced you the most, or who do you really respect, who you learned a lot from?
Yeah, I think that my experience in Cosmos has taught me that Zucky Mannion and Ethan Buckman are both folks that I look up to a lot, and I've learned a ton from over the last few years.
Awesome. And Jack, what percentage of your crypto portfolio is currently staked?
I think about 70% because I got to pay a bunch of taxes right now. So all my stuff is unstaked for taxes.
That makes sense. Cool. And what's an activity you do to relax from the crypto markets, from all the work?
Well, I do a bunch of things. I love biking. I take long bikes. I hike a lot. I've got a dog that loves to go on long hikes. So those are kind of my two big ones. I'm also, I used to be a chef in a former life, so I cook. So those three things.
Awesome. Yeah, good food is great. And awesome. So I'm really looking forward to the episode today. Today we're going to talk about the Sommelier Ethereum bridge, CosmWasm staking participation boosted by airdrops. We're going to talk about a milestone for blockchain governance, the Juno Proposal 16. We're going to talk about DAO adoption, IBC adoption, and your take on that, obviously. We're going to talk about the missing piece for the Cosmos ecosystem to take off, and some yield alpha across Cosmos and Juno. And stay with us, guys. If you have any questions in the meantime, just drop them. We're going to address your questions in the end of the show here. So just drop them in the chat, and looking forward to the show.
And today's episode is sponsored by Lido Finance. Lido is the market-leading liquid staking solution. With Lido, you can stake Ethereum, Solana, and Terra while keeping full liquidity via staking derivatives. These staking derivatives you use in multiple DeFi applications to generate additional yield. So be sure to check out Lido Finance. All right, and getting into the long-form questions here, Jack. So earlier this month, Axie Infinity's Ronin bridge was hacked for 600 million USD plus in value. Sommelier includes a decentralized bi-directional Ethereum bridge, which is an extended implementation of the Gravity bridge. Are you concerned that this bridge is now a target? And how are you reassuring users that the bridge is safe to use? How has this hack basically changed your thinking surrounding the bridge?
This hack does a lot of things to kind of reaffirm all of the thinking that we had around bridge design for a very long time. So, we are, that Gravity Bridge is sort of a general word for this sort of multi-sig bridge between Ethereum and Cosmos it gives each validator a Ethereum private key, which they then use to sign a bunch of messages that go over to Ethereum. So it kind of works just like a light client bridge in a lot of ways. However, it relies on a multi-sig. So like functionally, it's like a light client bridge, but it works a lot more like a multi-sig. What happened in that Ronin bridge case is they had a 5 of 9 multi-sig that was controlling the bridge. Each of the private keys for those multi-sigs were held on a computer. Likely, some of them were probably in the same data center. But there's just a fundamental difference between a 30 to 40 node validator set, where each of the individual operators are like staking rewards, you know, independent operators, versus a sort of 5 of 9 multi-sig where you're running a lot of those nodes in a trusted environment. Much easier to break into this environment that kind of like all looks the same, compromise 5 of the servers, and then get out and steal the funds out of the bridge, then break into, you know, like in a 40 validator set case, you know, maybe you need to break into 8 or 9 different individual validator operations to get those keys to steal the funds out of the bridge. So I think that by design, what we built with Sommelier and with the Gravity Bridge, that work that we started underlies the Gravity Zone, the Gravity Bridge, Umi, Sommelier, as well as I think a couple of other folks are using it. But I'm working with Zaki Munyan on that project, and we were the kind of key product folks behind IBC and worked really hard to bring that to market. So our experience bringing IBC to market has really informed our just general thinking on bridges. And you know, this hack doesn't really change anything about the way that I think about bridges, because I've always known that these multi-sig bridges that are kind of custodial have serious vulnerabilities and will be exploited, and we've seen it over and over again this year. And you know, I think that what's interesting is that the narrative in the mainstream crypto community has kind of been, whoa, bridges are real bad. But you know, folks who have been working on bridges for a while are saying, well, it's not that bridges are bad, it's that insecure bridge implementations are bad, and we need to do a lot more to secure bridges than we do currently.
Yeah, that's so right. And I think we are still very early, and it's probably good to see like a little bit of a washout for bad implementations of bridges. More so, it's going to help for the better implementations. So let's talk a little bit about Juno. It's like one of the first Cosmos SDK-based chains that implemented CosmWasm and like the smart contracts capabilities. Like, how difficult was the integration, and how does Juno plan to kind of compete with others who potentially integrate CosmWasm, like in the Cosmos ecosystem?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. You know, Juno, I think Juno is kind of really widely misunderstood. Ethan Frey and a few other folks from Regen Network and Shane from Stargaze started CosmWasm at a hackathon back in 2019. And Ethan Frey and the Confio team have kind of been the ones that have been kind of continuing to push that forward and continuing to bring it to market. Their go-to-market plans for CosmWasm have always been governance permissioned or governance gated smart contracts. This is very much in line with the sort of general Cosmos philosophy that individual chains should be kind of app chains, and each application needs to live on its own chain. So Ethan has built CosmWasm sort of natively in that way. There was always a way to run it as an unpermissioned VM, i.e. this sort of like permissionless smart contracts thing that's so popular throughout crypto. And there was really no one planning on launching it that way. So a couple of folks that I met in Telegram started to say like, hey, what's an easy chain we could launch? And Starport, which is the sort of getting started tool for Cosmos SDK, you can natively start up a CosmWasm chain. I was like, why don't you guys just use a Starport chain, build a community around that, and see if you can go ahead and launch it? And that's kind of the genesis story of Juno in a lot of ways. And Wolf Contract and Block Creator did a great job going out there and finding a lot of developers who are interested in building on top of this technology and essentially doing the go-to-market for CosmWasm in Cosmos. You know, that's gone phenomenally well. And I think a topic that we'll probably cover in a bit is Prop 16. You know, I've been a lot more actively involved in Juno since Prop 16 started, and I knew that there were a lot of developers working on the platform, but I didn't really have quite an idea of exactly how many there are. You know, what CosmWasm offers and what IBC offers is a drastically improved developer experience and user experience for end users over some of these legacy smart contract platforms that are a little bit slower, have a lot more issues with security in smart contracts. You know, for a number of reasons, CosmWasm was designed with this sort of adversarial environment in mind, and tries to make it easy to write secure contracts. Things like reentrancy, upgrades, all of that stuff is kind of taken care of natively within CosmWasm, and developers don't have to worry about it in the same way they do in Ethereum. So if we think about that as sort of the beginning of Juno, what makes Juno defensible moving forward? I think that this permissionless experimentation ground within IBC for not only cross-chain smart contracts, which is an emerging feature. Strangelove Ventures, which is my company, is working very hard to help bring cross-chain smart contracts to market. This is the ability for smart contracts on any two chains to do IBC connection directly between them. This is going to enable the sort of like next level of interoperability within Cosmos. Right now, people talk about interoperability as token bridges, and that's what we were talking about at the beginning of the call. But really, that token transfers are kind of like the email of interoperability. True composability, which is what we have on Ethereum, is not only possible, but is being developed in Cosmos and should be ready probably within the next 3 to 6 months, where you can query data from other chains, as well as have accounts on other chains and write to other chains. And in that way, you can build any of the kind of DeFi things that you need and compose with any of the other DeFi Legos that you need directly via IBC. And this is really the sort of true potential of Cosmos, and Juno is going to be a huge part of bringing that to market. So while it is this sort of generalized chain that could be seen to not have a lot of defensibility, I think the developer ease of use and the community that's built around it is going to be a huge moat in the coming years. And we're going to see a lot of really exciting projects come out of Juno.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard to really quantify what effect a community can have on a chain. And it's kind of like what we're seeing happen with Juno here. It's just a massive expansion in the growth of staking participation since launch. And in particular, I want to get into how the airdrops have kind of incited the staking participation. There's been a ton of community airdrops targeted at Juno stakers. And I wonder if you think this trend is healthy and sustainable for the overall community. And what are your learnings from this as well?
Is it healthy and sustainable in the long term? I think that sort of remains to be seen. But I think that if we look back at Web 2, what we will see is this idea of kind of airdropping to a distribution has some precedent. Back when Twitter's APIs were open and back when Facebook's APIs were open, what projects used to do is they would say, log in with Twitter, give us your social graph, and then we will like drop to your social graph. And oftentimes that was kind of like $5 gift certificates or whatever it is. But now that's tokens. That is still a broadly used marketing tool within traditional tech. So the question of like whether or not we see this kind of continuing, I think if we look to traditional tech, this is a tried and true method. This is marketing. This is how it's done. And in what the sort of innovation in Web3 is our marketing spend is giving people equity in these projects, essentially. It's giving people tokens in these projects. So if we step back and look at it that way, and Juno is kind of this community that delights in bringing new products to market and launching them, if that's happening, that community is going to be kicking off a ton of tokens. And if you're a new project launching out of that community, how do you bring that community along? You give them some tokens. So do I see this happening in the future? Yeah, I see this continuing for a really long time, especially with the model that Juno has. And one of the things that they're kind of specializing in is DAO management software. DaoDao is by far the best DAO tooling I've seen within the Cosmos. And the team that's building that, Jake and Zeke and some of the other guys who are working on that are just doing an absolutely incredible job. And some of the features coming out, I think, are going to be huge differentiators. So, you know, yeah, I do see that continuing into the future. And I think it's driven by this really fundamental kind of like marketing-like dynamic in the way that we bring products to market in Web3.
Cool stuff. Yeah, nice. And then so recently, like the Juno governance introduced like the proposal 16, where like there was one specific target in the proposal to like kind of basic limit the access to funds for him, like for one specific wallet. Like what does this proposal mean? And like maybe you can give a quick recap of that, and like what does it mean for the blockchain space, you think? And like how far should this governance go? Because it's a pretty yeah, I would say it's definitely a milestone for blockchain governance to be able to do something like this and enforce it on chain. And yeah, that goes like beyond consensus and like protocol upgrades and so on.
Oh yeah, I mean, this is a watershed moment for proof of stake, I think. You know, when we were talking about design of staking and governance, when we were bringing Cosmos to market, one of the discussions was, well, what if users want to vote to, say, destroy funds out of a wallet or do something like that? And the answer was, well, the system says that they can, and people will likely use it for this. So this is kind of the first instance of that. Just to sort of give you folks who are watching this who aren't familiar with this a little bit of a background, there is this entity called CCN, Cosmos Club Network, that was a big atom whale back in 2020. They did a lot of seminars in Japan and brought a lot of folks into the atom ecosystem, but they're a custodian and they hold funds on behalf of users. And part of the Juno ethos and the Juno airdrop is sort of this, we don't need exchanges type of thing. And, you know, a bunch of people have been in crypto for a while saying like exchanges are sort of bad actors within these proof of stake ecosystems. They don't participate in governance. They aren't giving people airdrops, which happens. You know, if you're holding atoms on Coinbase, you're not getting your osmosis airdrop for a bunch of regulatory reasons. So Juno explicitly excluded centralized exchanges and custodians from the airdrop originally. Now, these folks over in Japan, nobody really knew what they were doing. Nobody in the West really knew what they were doing, and a lot of people sort of misunderstood what was going on there. So they ended up getting included in the airdrop. Their custodial strategy included splitting their funds across many, many wallets. I think they had like 53 at the time of the snapshot. So after Juno Genesis, they took all 53 of those wallets that all got the maximum 50,000 Juno airdrop and consolidated them. And so this has kind of been a long-running topic within the community. Any one individual or entity with that much stake, I think in any system, would draw some eyes and some attention. And the fact that this community was so explicitly sort of like anti-exchange and so explicitly about this sort of fair drop, this huge community distribution, I think it was like 47% of the distribution was in an initial airdrop. And then another 30% of the distribution is in the community pool. And then, you know, I don't have the distribution numbers right off the top of my head, but this community was worried about the sort of overriding governance power of this entity. They submitted a proposal 4 to deal with this, and there was some discussion and negotiation, and that ended up getting voted down. And then Prop 16 came on chain, and it sort of ignited this huge discussion about what are the sort of fundamental properties of blockchain? What guarantees does proof of stake give? How strong is governance? And a lot of people who are kind of newer to the ecosystem were being exposed to these topics for the first time. So it's become this really broad discussion around governance and proof of stake that is, as you mentioned, Mirko, targeted on one specific individual. And it brings up a lot of interesting questions. One thing, you know, for me personally, like I think that proof of stake governance will get used to do stuff like this. And I think that the way that chains are going to end up differentiating moving forward is by having, different styles of governance. Some governance is going to be much more active and interventionist. Other governance is going to be much more hands-off and try to be as laissez-faire as possible. And I think that there's a lot of room for different chains to differentiate by choosing different styles there. But Juno, it kind of envisions itself as this activist governance and wants to take this step. And what we saw in Prop 16 that was really unprecedented was the voter turnout. Even if you scrub out some of the accounts that had like less than one Juno, so accounts where people were sort of spreading Juno around to potentially farm airdrops, it looks like around 40 to 50,000 individual users voted on that governance proposal. Now, I would challenge anyone listening to this to find a DAO where you had that level of user participation in a governance vote. So not only is that unprecedented in Cosmos, I think that's sort of unprecedented in the crypto space more broadly. And it shows how much work we as Cosmos have done, not only on DAO tooling and software, but on the community around that to help, support voter education, to support get out the vote efforts and things like that. And, the governance aspect of this has been fascinating to me. We just had an upgrade in Juno that's getting voted in, I believe, right now. And then we'll likely see some action on that Prop 16 thing in a following proposal. The core team put out a Unity proposal where the proposal is to lock this user's funds in a smart contract and then allow governance to decide how to move forward there, whether we distribute those rewards to some of their potential users or burn them. That will be up to Juno governance at that point.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, this voter turnout is really fascinating. I don't think there's like any comparison in the in the whole DAO space and anything. So yeah, that's very interesting. And you mentioned like
just sort of dovetail on that point. Cosmos Hub regularly turning out 7,000 to 8,000 individual accounts. Osmosis regularly turning out mid-thousands of accounts. These are not one-time events. We see very high voter participation across the entirety of the Cosmos. And people are really fond of talking about DAOs on Ethereum, but really what they mean by that is often these off-chain votes based on snapshots, and the voter turnouts are infinitesimal. The quorum or percentage of stake that's required to pass a governance proposal on most Cosmos chains is between 30 and 40%. We regularly hit quorum and we regularly double quorum on most Cosmos chains. The turnout on Prop 16 was actually over 98% of stake. That is crazy. Wow.
So what do you think is it that other ecosystems could kind of learn from Cosmos? Or like what is it that drives such high voter turnout in the Cosmos ecosystem?
It's really funny because we kind of hit this sweet spot. Tezos has this very powerful governance that's baked deeply in. They have these sort of on-chain upgrades that are done directly via governance. I would say that their governance system is like a little bit more advanced than what we have. Whereas on Ethereum, a lot of the governance for these DAOs happens off-chain because of gas costs and a number of other things. I think what Cosmos has done is bake governance in deeply enough, i.e. on-chain with this native module that handles upgrades and all of these other things. But also, we have, since the beginning of the project, had this culture of encouraging people to engage with the project, contribute back, and vote in governance. And, one of the interesting things, this entity CCN was talking to Wolf Contract, and the guy released his DMs because, it's one of these big online drama things. And in his DMs, what a lot of people were shocked to see was Wolf is asking this guy to go vote on governance proposals. And they're kind of going back and forth on stuff like that. Like, that is the sort of behind the scenes governance work that happens frequently in Cosmos. And I think that it's because we have these high quorums that in order to get anything done, it requires us as developers to reach out to a broad swath of the community, contact them, and get them to send a transaction. And, when you have low quorums, when you have accepted low voter participation, when you have high concentration of, high Gini coefficients, high concentration of wealth in some of these other protocols, it doesn't really encourage good small d democratic governance where, there's this get out the vote effort and where there's this sort of like broad engagement around this. And it's because of how deeply we baked this into the system, both from a software and a social perspective.
Cool. Yeah, that's really exciting. And then you also mentioned earlier that like the Cosmos ecosystem is kind of opposing exchanges, also like because they don't participate in governance and so on. Like, why do you think there's such a like oppose against? I mean, exchanges are like the one onboarding layer for anyone to really get onto these ecosystems. So they do certainly help the ecosystem in a way for like the adoption and everything else. I get that they're not participating in governance and like their staking is pretty shitty often. Or like, what do you think is like, what could the ecosystem do to kind of incentivize exchanges to participate more or like to really get involved? Or is it necessary for exchanges to get involved? Or like, what is your take on that? Like how or like what can we change to kind of have more correlation between the ecosystem and exchanges and get on a common ground there?
That's really interesting. I have not heard it. I have not heard the topic approached that way in a very long time. As Cosmos atoms, we didn't spend any time talking to exchanges about listings. Our stance on exchanges was, if you want to list this project, list it. And if you don't, we don't really care. Go for it. And the only work that I did with exchanges, that I've really done with exchanges, is on helping their custody teams understand how to use the software. I've never asked for a listing for any project I've been a part of. And, I think that ethos is kind of deep within the Cosmos ecosystem. And I think earlier in the conversation, I mentioned that Cosmos has a ton of sort of like undercover Bitcoin maxis. And like this comes from that sort of culture where, this is Bitcoin. We should be able to trade our Bitcoins peer to peer. This is this new internet money. Why do we need these sort of bridges between this traditional financial world and this new thing? Let's go build our own exchanges. We've got Osmosis Zone. Let's go make sure our chains can talk to each other so that we can all sort of work together. And that is very much in the Cosmos ethos, and it's kind of deeply baked there. So, Mirko, to answer your question in kind of a roundabout way, I don't know if the community as a whole kind of desires that. And I think that what we kind of want is to build this world where we don't have to deal with those exchanges. So we're sort of building for that, and that's what the community kind of wants. So, there are some individuals within the ecosystem, there are some projects which are doing more or less work to integrate with traditional exchanges and to talk to them. I think we've seen the recent announcements from Coinbase Cloud about their support for Osmosis. This is kind of happening slowly and naturally and not in a sort of structured way.
Yeah, and it's very cavalier for an ecosystem to have that stance on integrating with centralized exchanges. I do wonder if it in some ways does slow down the adoption overall and maybe something to do with price appreciation, but we'll leave that topic as is. And I just wanted to reiterate again, Jack.
I think that's a really valid point. And it is, Cosmos is different in a number of ways. And I think we started off, one of the lightning round questions is, what's the most underrated project in crypto? And I said Cosmos. And, this exchange thing is one of the reasons. A huge way that tokens get marketed and brought to end users is via these exchanges. It's a massive integration point, and we're incredibly underrepresented in that area. And I think we could be doing a lot better of a job. And, the reasons for that are cultural and also a little bit of a legacy one. The Interchain Foundation is a Swiss foundation, and the legal guidance that they've gotten since we launched the project is that paying for listings and exchanges is marketing a security, and Swiss foundations are not allowed to do that. So the biggest pot of money that would sort of do this in an organized way is like legally not allowed to. So we've kind of had to find a different way around. And what we've ended up doing is building this large kind of organic community, which is what's supported us and what we're kind of continuing to build on. And we've ended up having to work around that sort of own goal in a bunch of different ways that's made us stronger in other ways. So yeah, Kim, excellent point. Very well done.
And Jack, getting back to the DaoDao product that you mentioned earlier. So this is one of the first DAO builders that I've seen that allows users to create, fund, manage, and govern a DAO with basically no coding. So I wonder if you can touch a little bit on some of the results, how many DAOs have been created since launch, if you can give us a general number, and maybe if you can give us a favorite DAO of yours or the best use case that a DAO has brought to the table so far.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple hundred that have been created. Strangelove is currently working on an indexer for the DaoDao contracts so that we can do full text search and better discovery for DAOs so that users can kind of find those on the front end. So I'll have an exact number for you soon. But as far as DAOs that are like managing significant funds, I think it's probably in the 20 to 30 range right now. So it is still relatively young. One of those DAOs that is managing significant funds is Core One. And we use the DaoDao software to send payments to software developers and to, help people building on Juno get incentivized to do that. It is drastically easier than other multi-sig based solutions that I've used in the past for Cosmos. And especially as things like interchain accounts, cross-chain smart contract calls come into IBC, the ability to use a DaoDao instance on Juno to manage liquidity over on an osmosis pool, have a lending position over on Anchor protocol on Terra, and manage all of that from the DaoDao is like 6 months away. So right now it offers a whole ton of utility to anyone in the Cosmos who needs a sort of multi-sig to manage larger amounts of assets. And coming up here soon, it's going to have very, very deep integration with IBC, which is most interesting to me.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's going to be fireworks once that that integration happens. And talking about the vision of interoperability, this is basically being fulfilled with the IBC standards used within the Cosmos ecosystem. How would you assess the current adoption metrics? So how many chains are currently connected, and what is the vision for new chains joining throughout the next year or few years?
So what was the first part of that question?
How many chains are currently connected with IBC?
Yeah. I think we've got about 45 that are sort of like mainnet with value. I think, if you added test nets, like I think each mainnet probably has their own test net, and each of those are actually all IBC enabled. The tokens just aren't worth a whole lot. So this network can scale sort of arbitrarily. It's a message passing network, and as it evolves, I think we see some network topology changes that enable routing and do stuff like that. But where do I see this going within the next couple of years? I think within a year we see 200 chains on IBC, and then where it goes from there, I think is kind of up to anyone. I'm personally working on integrations with the Polkadot ecosystem, starting to work with the Near ecosystem on an integration. A couple of other Tendermint chains, things like Penumbra Zone, which is a privacy-enabled chain. They will need a custom IBC integration. So we'll start to see assets from other ecosystems also being available via IBC. And then, as I mentioned, this sort of deeper interoperability with interchain accounts and interchain queries that will enable that kind of true composability within the ecosystem. So where do I see this going? The overall Cosmos vision has always been app chains. Like each chain differentiates in some kind of unique way, whether it's via the validator set, whether it's via governance, whether it's via what financial applications it offers or what sort of like real world applications it offers. Things like Sentinel and Akash come to mind there. Things like Regen Network that's offering carbon credits on the blockchain. So, what does the IBC world look like in a year? A couple hundred chains, much deeper integration between those chains, and a bunch of really exciting emerging use cases. And it's going to be a fun next year.
Certainly, yeah. So the Cosmos ecosystem is really maturing, it seems, and I think osmosis was also a massive driver in terms of adoption and usage in the ecosystem. Like, what do you think is the next step, or like what is missing still for the Cosmos ecosystem to really take off and to really reach mainstream adoption? Like, what layer or what stack is missing that no one is working on yet, or like is not successfully working on yet? Something that will be like the next big milestone kind of for the Cosmos ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, Ethereum assets still are not really truly traveling into the ecosystem. Like, what I think that people really don't fundamentally understand is that every other blockchain ecosystem that has DeFi has been bootstrapped via a bridge to Ethereum. And those bridges have all been sort of custodial multi-sig bridges. Cosmos has built a number of trustless bridges, but none of them are really deployed in production. I think Axelar is probably the first one, but once we see Axelar assets flowing over to Osmosis and being used directly in pools, I think that's going to be a huge sort of step change in capabilities for the ecosystem. But what is it going to take for this to take off? What we're seeing is steady growth, just continuing steady exponential growth. And I think we continue to see that. I don't think that there's any one thing that's going to sort of make a huge difference there. I think that, it's a decentralized ecosystem with a lot of different people contributing. And the weakness of that is it kind of takes a while to get up off the ground and get running. But the strength of that is once it starts moving, it's really, really hard to stop, and it continues to pick up steam. And once we get that momentum, which we have, there's already these 45 IBC enabled chains, like the hardest and most dangerous part of the network bootstrapping, we've already gotten past. So like, I think we've de-risked this work that we've done fairly significantly. And what we're going to see over the next year, 2 years is sustained and continued exponential growth.
That makes sense. Yeah. And certainly there's a lot of very organic growth. And that reflects in like the voter turnout and everything else, really. And you already mentioned like the Cosmos ecosystem and like the core team and everyone. No one had like a big focus on exchange listings, obviously. But apart from that, like, why do you think that Cosmos is such an underdog and like so underrated, like across the crypto investor community and everything? Because like, is that only because it's not that adopted on exchanges and so on, or like what else is kind of like because it's such a thriving ecosystem and there's so much participation and everything, but it's really lacking a bit of awareness across the like mainstream crypto community, you can say.
Yeah, I think that a core thesis that a lot of chains have had and that has been used to sell people cryptocurrency is there is going to be one cryptocurrency. There is going to be one chain that matters. And, Bitcoin has had this narrative for a long time. Ethereum still has this narrative. The Ethereum narrative is very Ethereum centric. Oh, we're going to have this one chain where all of global finance settles and everything else is going to roll up into this. And we're going to capture value. All of these other sort of like blockchain projects, many of them have all also parroted in this narrative. I call this the one chain to rule them all narrative. Cosmos has, from the beginning, eschewed that narrative. We say there are going to be many chains. This world is going to be multipolar. That is a harder sell in a lot of ways. It's hard to tell somebody like, hey, so this cryptocurrency thing is going to happen and no one really knows what's going to win. So we just want to build something to make all of these things interoperate. And we think that's going to be valuable in and of itself. And that experience is going to be enable us as the Cosmos Hub to create something that is tremendously valuable in this multipolar world. That's a much more nuanced sell. It's a much harder sell, and we've been the only ones selling that for a really long time. So I think that's part of the reason why the Cosmos community is a little niche and why it's been sort of slow to gain adoption. But the word that you used was sort of organic growth. And like, that's what we've seen. And, I get out there and I have these conversations with people. Many other cosmonauts get out there and they have these conversations with people. And, I think that if you look back at the history of blockchain, what you've seen is over and over again, the way blockchain has scaled as an industry is by creating more chains. And the only project that has said, hey, we just got to make them all talk to each other, and has been working on that since 2014, is Cosmos. So the reason why we're seeing that adoption is because the way that this has worked in practice is what we're doing, and more people are kind of coming around to that. So as we see the sort of waning of this one chain to rule them all narrative, I think we see more and more people adopting Cosmos.
Yeah, and it's definitely interesting to watch people's perceptions change over time. I can remember back in 2017, 2018, interviewing Zaki for the first time when he was the launch master for Cosmos. And I remember there being a 30% inflation right off the bat. And I'm like, coming from the Tezos community, I'm like, there's no way this is going to, take hold. The inflation is going to dilute everyone. And now we look at consistently 100% APY as being the norm, right? And it's like 6% is, we don't even bother with that anymore. It's not enough. So it's just definitely odd to see people's perception change over time. And a fun question for you.
Zaki's gone the other way. We launched the first no inflation Cosmos chain with Som.
Yeah, so flip side there, right? And kind of a fun question here for you, Jack. So what's the best alpha or the best yield strategy that you can suggest to the users currently available across Cosmos and Juno ecosystems?
Oh, what's the best yield strategy? I mean, I love blue chips, and osmosis liquidity pools and osmosis staking are still great. They have the first to market decentralized exchange in Cosmos. The APYs are still very high. There's the third inning coming in a couple months. You just can't go wrong there. If you're looking to get some more of these degen yields, there's some fun stuff on Juno that I would encourage folks to go check out. But, Juno swap with raw coming, there will be sort of this retrospective airdrop to LPs there. Juno swap yields are also decent right now, and after raw they will be increased because they will be able to offer some liquidity rewards. So that's what I'd encourage folks to go check out.
Pretty cool. Awesome. And what would you suggest someone to learn more about the Cosmos ecosystem in general, and to really get involved with the ecosystem? Where's the best way to start, or the best place to start?
Is there this is another one of these weaknesses of these decentralized ecosystems is that it's hard to it's hard to have a single place for people to start. Cosmos.network actually does have a pretty fantastic set of resources for folks looking to get started in the ecosystem, both from a developer perspective. Starport documentation is linked from there. The Cosmos SDK documentation is linked from there. I would really encourage folks to go take a peek over there. There's also a list of all of the different live Cosmos chains, as well as links to them through there. So that's a great resource for people looking to get started, and would encourage folks to go check that out.
Awesome. That's a great advice. And if you guys have any other questions, just drop them in the chat now. So we still have a bit of time for community questions. There's one question so far. What's the next project that you will be working on, kind of?
I'm working on a couple of really exciting things kind of behind the scenes right now. One I've teased on a number of podcasts, so I will also tease it here. It's called the Cosmos Builders Foundation. That is, many large open source software projects have these big software foundations where all of the projects that use it contribute to help maintain the core software behind it. In Cosmos, all of this sort of public good infrastructure has all been funded by the ICF, which is essentially atom holders. So I think that there's a lot of room for a community-run organization to help contribute back to this core software that we all rely on for these different chains. I'm in the middle of putting together a bunch of folks from sort of all of the well-known Cosmos chains to build one of these organizations. Should have some announcements about that soon. So that's one of the more exciting projects I'm working on. What's the next project Jack will be working on? Also, Sommelier. This is something I've been talking about for a long time. We've built a lot of piping for that. We have not launched a product yet. There's a token out there, people trade it. I think there's like 15 or 20 million in liquidity across all the exchanges out there right now. So it's like very small percentage of tokens out on the market. We're going to be launching a managed Aave product. So this will automatically put your stable coins in the highest yielding stable coin strategy on Aave. And it will kind of intelligently swap between those. And all of that will be managed and intermediated by the Sommelier blockchain. So kind of this fundamentally new DeFi product. And when we talked about bridges and the issues with multi-sigs, I think fund management in DeFi has a lot of these issues as well. These individual sellers or vaults, as I think they're called sort of broadly in DeFi, are often owned and managed by multi-sigs. Sometimes, in the worst case scenarios, they're managed by individual keys. The Sommelier blockchain takes that and moves it from as an individual key or a multi-sig to a validator set, owning and managing that contract and moving the liquidity around. And I think that that's kind of a fundamental step up in security. And also, the original ethos of blockchain is this sort of trustlessness and this ability to have these systems that are trust minimized. And, a multi-sig or an individual key is not trust minimized. There's a lot of risk there. And there's a very small set of parties that have to collude in order to rug the contract. And we see this over and over again. It's a lot harder for a validator set of substantial size with a reputations to uphold to rug something like that. And this is kind of the fundamental innovation of Sommelier in a lot of ways. And we should see that product coming to market hopefully at the end of this month. We're pretty close to launching that.
Pretty cool. And next question here from Luke. So actually, we did have Federico on from Evmos 2 weeks ago. And Luke asked here, so he wants your views and opinion on how you feel about the resumption of the chain from the last block as compared to the restart that was being debated. So they're going to resume, not restart from zero.
They're going to resume, not restart from zero. I don't really have strong feelings on this. I would have liked to have seen them restart from zero. But, I trust Fedi and Akash and the rest of the team there. Some really talented cosmonauts, a bunch of blockchain at Berkeley grads. I worked at the Berkeley office for a long time, so worked very closely with all of those folks. Have a ton of respect for that team and what they're doing. I think that the sort of introduction of an EVM into the Cosmos ecosystem right around the same time when we see Ethereum assets coming into Cosmos has the potential to create this huge explosion. A lot of the discussion today kind of centered on how the Cosmos community is different from other communities and how we're sort of off on our own. I think that this is going to be a nice entry point for a lot of people from Ethereum to come into Cosmos with tooling they're familiar with. And it's a great opportunity for that. We're really excited about it.
Absolutely. And there's a lot to look forward in the coming months here. Sommelier, a lot more developments. So just a great time to have you on the show here, Jack. And how can people follow you or learn more about the stuff you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm at Jack Zampolin on Twitter. Follow us at Strangelove Fund on Twitter. Go to strangelove.ventures and check out what we're working on. For folks who have been following me for a while, I've been kind of Jack Zampolin all over the place doing Jack Zampolin things. Recently, I've started sort of bringing a lot of those efforts into my validator company called Strangelove Ventures. We've got a lot of exciting things on the pipeline. We're hiring both front end and back end engineers. I think we're also hiring user experience designers. So anyway, that's where best to find me.
Awesome. And for everyone watching, please check out previous episodes of Staking Mondays. You can find these on YouTube and Spotify. Be sure to subscribe to our channel, hit that like button, and turn on notifications. Thanks so much for joining us today, Jack. For Mirko, I'm Ken. And as always, happy staking.
Awesome. Thank you guys for having me. Really appreciate it. This is a great show, and the questions were a blast.